Okay, audio archives. Tripp Keber edition, CEO of Dixie Elixirs, Dixie Brands, the Willy Wonka of weed, the pot baron of Colorado, the marijuana millionaire himself, who goes ahead and debunks all of those myths. And we find out that he is the decent human being that we knew he was. So enjoy. Okay, so we've got the Tripp Keber. Right, Tripp?
Fortunately for everybody, there is only one.
That's it. It's Tripp Keber, CEO, Dixie Elixirs, Dixie Brands, I think.
That's correct, yeah, new title.
And we're going to get into why there's the new title, but my first question for you is, what are your thoughts and feelings on Rollie Massimino in the mid-1980s?
Well, ironically, having grown up in Washington, D.C. with a father who went to Georgetown undergrad and then Georgetown dental school, I was raised on a fine man by the name of John Thompson, head coach of the Georgetown
Indeed.
Hoyas. So you can imagine, years later walking into the DuPont Pavilion and seeing this 5'5" little roly-poly Italian. I wasn't sure what to think, but over the course of 2+ years, I learned to appreciate the Villanova Wildcats, and now I cheer for both, unless they're playing each other, in which I cheer for neither.
Right. No, exactly. And I mean, so 1986, I think, is when you go to Villanova, if I did my research correctly. And that's the year after Villanova beats Georgia. I mean, like, it's crazy that if you grew up a Hoya, that you went to Villanova specifically that exact year, right? Or no?
Yeah, I think I did so just to piss my father off. I had been in 13 years of all-boys Jesuit schooling, and to watch Villanova beat Georgetown, and I think my dad put a golf club through a television. Those were those big tube televisions back in the 80s. It was quite a polarizing experience, but we maintained a strong relationship, father-son. And I think on occasion, very, very rarely, my father might be even known to be a Villanova Wildcat fan. I think it is rare, though.
Got it. All right, well, you just brought up two things that kind of might inform, who you are. And so I want to kind of unpack both of them. So, as far as the Jesuit upbringing, that's probably the easier thing to talk about, right? Well, what's the key lesson learned?
It's funny. It's ironic that you'd ask that, Seth, because last week I had the privilege of being in Washington, D.C. for 5 days, 2 of which were spent lobbying our federal Congress. And I certainly took that as an honor. It was really a privilege and really interesting just to see the dynamics changing as the industry continues to mature. But just 2.5 blocks from our U.S. Capitol is my alma mater, Gonzaga College High School, which is where I spent my 4 informative years during high school. And I took the liberty to depart from the Hill and went down to Gonzaga. I had not been to the campus in years and years and years, and I ran into my freshman high school coach, who's now been at Gonzaga for 33 years, a guy by the name of Alvin Maddox, a former professional running back, NFL. And the first thing he said to me was, "Man, we are incredibly proud of what you're doing in Colorado and for the industry." And I really thought that was an interesting statement, certainly because I wasn't sure how I was going to be received. Obviously, really the mantra of the Jesuits is a man for others. I probably should say people for others, because I think we Jesuit educational institutions serve both men and women. In my case, it was all men, but men for others was our theme, if you will. And I think you could probably tie some analogies to what we're doing here in the cannabis space. But ultimately, I found my way to the alumni center, where they were very interested in sitting down with me and, more importantly, talking about potentially if might be willing to donate a new football field or a building or even just a couple of parking spots. So apparently our money will spend.
Indeed. And I mean, that gets to, I mean, you keep getting called a baron and a millionaire. And so I guess, people are starting to pick up on that, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's been widely reported that there is an immense amount of wealth being created in the industry. I would not disagree with that. I think there's the false perception that, we're all getting rich and potentially lighting cigars, if you will, with $100 bills. That's certainly not us. I mean, it's incredibly important to understand where we stand as an industry, still in its nascent stages, Seth. And, the prudent businessmen and women are reinvesting those dollars. And irrespective of whether I'm titled a pot baron or even more silly this summer in People magazine as a marijuana millionaire, I think I've been pretty candid that I came into this industry having experienced modest success, and it potentially could even be argued that I have less money today because most of it has been poured into this crazy business we're in. But times are good, and I think most businesses, and certainly including many, if not all of mine, are truly prospering, and certainly we're excited for what the future holds.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're going to absolutely get into all of that. And I appreciate you breaking that down for us, though, at the top, because, greater society certainly misinformed with the details of what's happening. But now, to get back to the Jesuits, you said football coach. What position did you play in high school?
Well, I played left out because I played maybe 2 or 3 games as a freshman, and we were doing something called nutcrackers that lines mano a mano up. A ball is thrown, and then may the best man come out. And I went up against what turned out to be the head or the lead quarterback for the U.S. Naval Academy, a guy by the name of Gary McIntosh, and he was probably 6'3", probably 190, and I was probably 5'10", $160. And let's just put it this way: Gary McIntosh won Tripp's collarbone 0, and so my football career came to a conspicuous close that year, and ultimately I focused on other sports, which included wrestling, which I'd always enjoyed, competitive wrestling. I took that through grade school and into high school, but more importantly, lacrosse. And I was incredibly excited to learn that Gonzaga was ranked number 1 in the country preseason this year. And I was a founding captain of the Gonzaga College Lacrosse Club, now as a full varsity sport, some 30 years later. So it's really exciting to see how that program has evolved.
Totally, and captain, of course, a leader from the get-go. What position did you play in lacrosse so we can envision you on the field?
Well, I think I played goon, but I played center midi, and I focused a lot on face-offs and obviously setting up for my teammates to look terrific. And I always enjoy that. I love the physicality of the sport. I love the camaraderie of competitive sports. And for those of you who don't know lacrosse, it's literally one of the fastest growing sports in the country and possibly one of the fastest sports on the field. And so it was rewarding in a bunch of different categories. And I really miss those days. I wish I could get back into it, or at least potentially have a son or daughter who would choose to embrace the sport, but not so lucky in those categories.
Got it. Well, you've got a daughter, right? I
do, yeah, and she's played lacrosse, and she and Dad threw the ball around, but it was not her thing. She is an incredibly accomplished equestrian, and to be candid, I'm so incredibly proud of her because you have to be an extremely competitive individual to sit on that horse and to control these fabulously stupid animals. Probably get some flack for that, but and as I remind her, the hardest thing about being a cowgirl, or in her case, an accomplished equestrian, is the ground. You're not making mistakes or falling off your horse unless you're making jumps. So she's done very well with that. I don't know why she chose such a stressful sport but probably to teach her father and mother a valuable lesson.
Yeah, no, certainly. You described her, at least one of the words you used was competitive, and I know that her father is certainly competitive. And it sounds like from the quick anecdote you said about your father with the golf club and the television, he might be competitive too. Tell us a little bit about Papa Keber.
Yeah, I think this has been a personal quality, if you could call it such, and/or a characteristic that has been passed down from generation to generation. Clearly, my father, in addition to being highly competitive, was a very strict disciplinarian, which ties into sort of the early days of this career. But my father took Georgetown sports, particularly college basketball, very, very seriously. And I think when I announced to him that I was going to go to Villanova University, I was expecting potentially a golf club across the head, sort of tongue-in-cheek, of course. But he was highly supportive, and it just shows who the man he is. I appreciated that. And on occasion, I like to think that I have the ability to evolve like he did in 1986 when I matriculated at Villanova University.
There you go. And so there sounds like there's a lot to learn from a guy like that, and seeing the compassion behind the competitiveness. What's kind of one of the key lessons that you've taken from your dad?
Yeah, well, my father taught me, and my siblings as well, but being the oldest in the family, male, if you will, as well, it was, there was a lot of pressure. My father demanded excellence in all categories, some of which I excelled in better than others. I was never known to be the perfect child. I was a little bit of a hellion in high school. And I remember vividly my freshman year, my father was probably bench pressing about 180 pounds, which would be pretty typical for a middle-aged guy in his probably late 30s to, by the time I was a senior in high school, to well in excess of 400. So you could understand where that disciplinarian edge came into play. But, I have immense respect for my father then, and even more so today. Life is not perfect. It throws you curveballs. And, when you're dealt lemons, you make lemonades. And I think there's a lot of parallels, synergies, if you will, that we've experienced in the cannabis industry. I mean, I've used the term delusional confidence on more than one occasion. And I think some of that comes from both my father and, equally as important, my mother.
Yeah, delusional confidence. Go ahead and get a level deeper there. What are we talking about?
You have to wake up. I mean, I really, at the end of the day, in addition to thinking of myself as a cannabis business executive, maybe on occasion a thought leader, certainly, as you pointed out, extremely, extremely competitive. We have an innate desire to win. I think there are many winners in many categories in this space. But literally I wake up, and as one of my loving and very close friends, who's also a former wife of mine, says, you're the proverbial glass half full. And, it's required that attitude, Seth, to get here, because we both know, even in the relatively short period in which you've been covering the industry, although done it exceptionally well, is that, the only thing that is consistent is change. And with change comes potentially chaos. Lots of times it creates improvement, but I can tell you what generally it means to me is expense. And this is an industry that you have to run very, very lean. Frugality is certainly a quality or characteristic that you need to possess. And so having that attitude that we are going to get through this, that we are continuing to climb up and to the right, and ultimately we will be one of those winners, requires that delusional confidence that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm going to take the tangent here when you say up and to the right. But actually, first a different tangent. Did you say one of your close friends that's also a former wife? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I've had the privilege to be married to two women who I, in addition to we're saying very positive things, they are former wives. They've been highly supportive. This industry is incredibly challenging. With that comes sacrifice. Just last year, I dissolved my second marriage. Again, I'll take more than 50% of the responsibility. But at the end of the day, it is a 7-day-a-week, 365, 15 to 18-hour days. And with that, things break. And so, I've made a strong relationship with both the mother of my fine daughter, but more recently, certainly my former wife. Again, both highly supportive of what I do as a business executive.
Interesting. So interesting. And you say up and to the right, and I think what we're going to discover here on the audio archives is that there are many of you guys that are leading the industry that certainly did not grow up, kind of left-leaning in any way. I mean, you worked for the Heritage Foundation? I know it was only for a couple days, but you did, right?
No, I worked for the Heritage Foundation for well in excess of a year. I worked for my congressional member for a couple of days before I was asked to goose step over to the Heritage Foundation, where my political views, which were notoriously right of center and highly conservative, would be more appreciated. And I really fit in at the Heritage Foundation. Very funny story that I'll tell you about, 25 plus years later, finding myself at the Heritage Foundation for an MPP board meeting. But yes, traditionally I was conservative from a political standpoint. I worked for President Reagan, certainly not in the Oval Office, but under his administration, and really learned some valuable skill sets from just a pure negotiation, from a pure salesmanship, and from a pure maintaining a dialogue in which allows for a win-win situation. Because at the end of the day, ultimately, that's what politics seemingly are all about.
Yeah, no, and I think that for most people that kind of get to know, the who's who of the industry, if you will, I think the first thing that folks find out almost immediately is obviously these people are not kidding around. This is not a joke. This is not a hobby. This is very serious business, and it's been very, very, very hard work to get where we are right now. So I think people get that kind of once they start to pay attention even a little bit. What I find fascinating right now is finding out, as I get to know you guys more, is how much of a right-wing streak there is through, a fair amount of you, right? I mean, do you find the same? Tell me more about that.
I really, I would describe myself now, Seth, as apolitical. I really vote with my pocketbook. I think the cannabis of movement has now straddled the aisle. We support dozens and dozens of candidates at both the local, the state, and the federal level. Again, both sides of the aisle. This is not so much a political movement, although I think it will play a significant integral role in the re-election of candidates and potentially the election of new politicians that will serve our country, and for that it's really exciting. I mean, I don't have an interest in political dialogue unless it's meaningful and to the point, meaning me understanding what somebody means if he's sitting across the table and wants my money and says he's going to support our industry, because that's generally the gist of the conversation. So, I laughed because not too long ago in an article I was dubbed the Ronald Reagan of reefer, which I'm sure our former president was rolling over in his grave, and hopefully our First Lady is not paying that close attention, because I'm sure she wouldn't be too happy.
Yeah, she'd be more pissed than him, I think.
Yeah,
right?
Well, just remember, it was her that created the just say no. So with the crackling egg in the frying pan.
Exactly. So anyway, what is that familial though? Do you think? I mean, and you just said, I'm kind of, I don't really care about politics as long as people are getting things done. I'm rephrasing what you just said, or paraphrasing it. But was that from the jump? Was that from the family, that kind of right wing tendency, or was that? Did you find that yourself?
I think I may have found it myself. I was pretty conservative in my views, and as I've been very, very forthright in Canada. I mean, I never ever had a strong relationship with cannabis. My relationship with cannabis, as I guess maybe you would expect, is as strong as it's ever been. Like our own president, I understand that marijuana is less harmful than alcohol. As a young 46-year-old, you're not as sprightly after a MPP gala. And so maybe I should consider embracing marijuana, i.e. Vaping it, as opposed to, drinking 2-3 beers in the evening. So, but, those political views evolve as you start to get into the realities of life. And at the end of the day, I have a great interest in continuing to promote the creation of wealth on behalf of my team members. And as part of that, we need a regulatory framework that allows an adult use citizen or potentially a medical marijuana patient to have a relationship with the plant. And so I'm going to vote, I'm going to support, I'm going to financially back those individuals, men and women, again at the state, the local, the state, and ultimately the federal level, up to our president, that will offer me that.
Yeah. No, I mean, we talk a lot about, prohibition. And you're talking about that now. When we first started talking to each other about 2 years ago now, you told me when you thought cannabis would be legal kind of nationwide. I don't know if you remember what you said then, but what are your thoughts now, where we are?
Well, yeah, I've said it very, very publicly, including in front of, 3,000+ people at the last year's National Marijuana Business Conference. I wagered a bet with my executive director of Marijuana Policy Project, one of the most astute observers of marijuana reform in the world, a brilliant strategist. And, I said very publicly that I believe that marijuana, i.e. the federal capitulation, will take place as early as 2017. And I said, I'll put my money where my mouth is. And I bet Rob $1 or 1,000, and he very quickly accepted the $1,000 wager. He was pushing it out a little bit further to 2020. And, although, Seth, I may be accused of happy ears, we're seeing a fundamental shift both politically, legally, and more important, socially. Having dozens of law enforcement officers coming through here and being open to a dialogue, in my opinion, is very, very telling. I have the privilege of sitting on, more than a dozen boards and affinity groups, and really get a good look at where those tea leaves are falling. And, I believe with great confidence, although I'm very comfortable being wrong on occasion, that 2017 could be our year.
Yeah. Yeah. And, when you look at the way that the presidential candidates are shaping up, there isn't too much noise about repeal, in Colorado, Washington, et cetera. I think that there's one candidate who hasn't listed himself as a candidate who has said that he wants to repeal. Have you heard anything else? I mean, you've got your ear closer to the ground.
Yeah, a lot of things that we discuss at board levels are held in strict confidence, but we're definitely seeing trends. Rand Paul would be probably the ultimate cannabis candidate. I think, particularly libertarians may take exception to some of his other views on significant platforms, maybe immigration alone. But, at the end of the day, I think cannabis is going to play a pivotal role in candidates being elected or reelected. And you're seeing sort of an evolution in the candidate. Look at our own governor here in the state of Colorado. He's literally moonwalking off of some of the much more negative feelings he had towards cannabis, and very willingly and graciously accepted tens and tens of thousands of dollars from our industry. This is for his reelection campaign in the gubernatorial race in Colorado last year. And although he probably didn't appreciate being on the cover of dozens of media publications, this is the first time ever a sitting governor probably has openly and willingly accepted reelection dollars for a gubernatorial reelection. And so that's history. You've got our own president talking about it. You've got last week in D.C. no less than 6 congressional representatives openly and publicly supporting one One congressional member said he did everything but drink the bong water out of California, and although probably not the visual that we want, he was really proving a point. Right. And so, that political change is going to play a very, very important role. And I think potentially as we begin to mobilize the vote, much of which is going to be young in federal campaigns or presidential campaigns, being negative or on the wrong side of cannabis reform potentially could be detrimental, if not fatalistic. And I think the more progressive thinkers truly are beginning to understand that, coupled with the fact that we have immense power through our financial contributions to drive these campaigns through to the goal line.
Yeah, no, and so we're talking about 2016, 2017, and obviously that'll be a shift when November of 2016 comes. So then 2017, certainly your prognostication, if you will, would be right in those sights. But you brought up the president. We're sitting here in the very beginning of May 2015, and it was just last week or 2 weeks ago that he had some comments on decriminalization. What are your thoughts on that? And the immediacy of of that language from him.
Well, I generally leave it to far smarter people like Rob Campia to help me truly process, translate, and ultimately understand how the language is going to profoundly and positively impact the industry. Again, we also have amazing organizations like NCIA, all of which have been extremely supportive to us, and certainly to you as a journalist, as a I don't know what I would describe you as, Seth, but maybe a game show host on occasion. I think there's really a unique opportunity here to create a voice that is cohesive. And decriminalization, I just came from the District of Columbia, which is where I was born and raised, and walked through neighborhoods that literally 10 years ago I would have been the only Caucasian and likely might not have left on my own accord. I mean, these neighborhoods were so incredibly dangerous. We've seen this gentrification, and it seems really silly to be putting people in jail for the nonviolent drug offense possession of marijuana. And so now you see potentially a community that will thrive and that will allow for the creation of jobs. And like the state of Colorado that reaped no less than $75+ million, of which $40 million will go to the building of public education institutions in our state. Why wouldn't we consider that in the District of Columbia or Detroit, if you will, that is, hemorrhaging, debt. And so I think decriminalization is where it all starts. And again, there's a very few unique opportunities, maybe Ohio being one, where you go from complete prohibition, to complete, adult use legalization. I mean, these are incredibly exciting times and are going to be absolutely fascinating to watch, really from inside the arena. So I think, the decriminalization is a great first step because there's literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives are being permanently ruined, or I should say limited in their ability to achieve higher levels of success because of the burden of a felonious conviction associated with marijuana.
Yeah, no. Absolutely. And that's Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 and all parts in between. So I want to go back because you've got everybody that knows Tripp knows he's got a specific point of view on everything, right? Is that fair?
Generally.
So I'm trying to kind of make my way in here. We talked about your dad. We talked about the Jesuit upbringing. We talked about your football coach a little bit. We talked about DC. Take me through the real estate years, if you will, right? You had a little bit of success there, but what got you into it? And let's start there. How'd you get into real estate? If you went to Villanova, where did we go from Villanova to real estate?
Yeah, well, came out of Villanova with the intentions of potentially getting into. I was a political science major. My intentions were to go into politics. I quickly ascertained that might not be the best move for me. I had grand ambitions and, making, I think, a whopping $12,000+ a year, which is what I made, I think, in 1988 or 89. I finished college early and immediately went back to Capitol Hill. I was an intern for a period of time and then converted it to full-time employment. But, at the end of the day, your career takes sort of jogs, if you will, in the road. And I understood that making monies was going to be important for me, and so politics ultimately was not necessarily the route. My father at the time was interested in becoming more of a developer, which generally doctors are notorious for being poor businessmen, and so I wanted to make sure that we had all the skill sets we needed. But we had our first run at real estate development in the early 90s, the Gulf War, the first one ensued, and we took a little bit of a thump, if you will. The downturn in the economy certainly impacted us. My father was gracious enough to allow me to exit the business without harm, and got into working in a law firm and various different careers. Then I went into technology, which is where I resided for pretty much the balance of my career until I moved to Colorado. I sold my equity in my company in 2001, September 1st, 10 days before the world changed, and really exited that space. I really didn't get into what I would describe as the modern day developer, the developer as I think of myself, until 2006, probably late 2005, 2006, where there was really this upturn. And candidly, also I was bored. I had been retired, what I called gainfully unemployed, for a couple of years, and clearly too young for that. And so real estate development was what I would describe as high risk, high reward. Met my amazing partner, Chuck Smith, who is still my partner in that business, as well as many, many others. And that's where I resided for about 4.5, 5 years. And I think there's no coincidence, because in addition to maybe the conservative slant for maybe some portion of the cannabis industry, I've identified an unusually high percentage, certainly here in Colorado, of business owners that are former or recovering real estate developers. And I think, again, some of that has to do with the tolerance and or appetite for risk, and being able, to make decisions on the fly, what I describe as crisis management by hour.
Indeed. I think, and I don't mean to jump around here, but I feel like the first risk that we talked about was you going to your Hoya father and telling him that you were going to Villanova. So clearly from age 17 or 18, you already had that risk, ability to take risk, within, right?
It's so cliche, but I think, being an entrepreneur, Seth, is really innate. Of course, there's learned skills that come from it, and with every mistake you make, you obviously come out of it with a lesson. We make mistakes every single day because we make decisions. We do not look for yes men and yes women in our company. We look for people that are empowered to make decisions. And on occasion, albeit more rare these days, we make mistakes. And so that's okay, as long it's not fatalistic. We can just learn from that. And so I think early on, even as a child, I had that sort of entrepreneurial bug and would hire local kids in my community to cut grass, and I'd pay them maybe $6 a lawn, and I'd get paid, 10. I'd take $4 off the top for really just coordinating the that relationship. Maybe that's what I'm doing, 35 years later. So I don't know.
Right, with soda.
Yeah, I think it starts probably at an early age, but again, plenty of thumps on the back of the head from those early days.
Totally. How old were you when you were doing that with the lawns? That's hilarious.
Yeah, I think the last time I cut a lawn, I was probably about 11 years old. Sort of one of my badges of honor. I own multiple homes, certainly around the state, and not one of them has a blade of grass in it, because my lifestyle is not conducive to mowing the lawn on a Saturday morning. But Those early days, even at the age of 10 or 11, I just didn't want to push the mower.
It was much easier to make, sure, I'll make less, I'll make $4, but you go ahead and you mow the lawn, right?
Take the top. Make it up in volume.
All right, and so there's a little. That's it. There's a little bit of that economics or those economics in nightclubs. I know that you kind of had a foray in there. I mean, what was that like? So I mean, you had the real estate. You were on DC. You're in DC. You have politics in your background, and then you go to the other side here with the nightclubs. How'd you get into that?
Well, primarily because I was probably and properly labeled Denver's oldest teenager. Listen, the easiest way to make a small fortune in the nightclub business is by starting with a large one. It is a incredibly risky proposition, but at the end of the day, I do give credit to that industry for inspiring me to get into the cannabis space. But it was never super important for me to make considerable amounts of money in the entertainment nightclub space. I realized early on that I had no interest in dealing with venues that had live music or potentially food, because I couldn't figure out who were crazier, either professional chefs or live musicians, until I met cultivators of medical marijuana. And then I really had met my match. But they put both of those two former in short pants as compared to the prima donna effect. But, in reality, I have great respect for people who commercially cultivate marijuana. It's an incredibly technical science coupled with an art. But the nightclub business was just, for me, about killing time, creating a social platform which I could build a foundation here in the state of Colorado, specifically Denver. And it really paid massive dividends. And I realized early on how potentially medical marijuana was going to impact the sale of alcohol. And although I couldn't have really envisioned, some of it I certainly would attribute to luck. But, if you look back in 2009, which is ultimately when we entered into this space, really passively as investors and looking to prop up businesses in a very, very chaotic and uncharted industry, that, fundamentally, I believe that, the legalization of adult use marijuana would have a profound and potentially very positive impact on the state of Colorado. And hence, in 2011, early 2012, we really got behind the legalization of adult use marijuana. And again, I attribute it all to being in the bar business.
Right. Interesting. And then, so you're in the bar business, you see cannabis as a possibility, you start investing. Is that, so Red Dice Holdings, is that where that came to light? My first question. My second question would be, is that because you're literally rolling the dice because it's such risky investments, or am I in the right area here?
You are. Sitting to the right of me for now 6 years is a pair of red dice that I clipped off a table in Vegas. I'm not going to say which casino. They'd probably ban me for life. But it was one fundamentally that my business partner and I decided that we were going to get into the game, if you will, the medical marijuana business, and throw the dice. And I have some business cards that are of no value now because that company has been retired, but the dice stay with me. And I would challenge you to find me in a situation where those dice are not firmly placed on my person, because they do two things. Number one, remind me of the inherent risk in what we do, but they also tie me to our extremely humble beginnings, very, very modest offering, and I think that's important. Because, whether you're dubbed the Ronald Reagan of reefer, the Gordon Gekko of ganja, or the Willy Wonka of weed, all of which are silly, some of which I appreciate more, listen, I'm a businessman, I'm a father, I am a CEO. I put my pants on like everybody else, and we have great days and we have good days, and on occasion we have a poor day. But no one person can take responsibility for the success of this industry, for the success of my company, and no one person is going to be the dominant player. There are going to be thousands and thousands of winners. And at bare minimum, I know I'll have the privilege of knowing many of those, many of which I would consider close friends, contemporaries, Seth. I hope you're one of them. You continue with your trajectory for your fabulous company, for what you're doing for our industry. I think is spectacular, bringing a level of professionalism to these events. And if I'm fortunate to be one of those winners, then I can tell you it will be attributed to good luck, great people, and, a lot of delusional confidence.
Right, exactly. It comes back to that. And by the way, if you think starting a successful cannabis business is tough, try stealing a pair of dice from a casino. That's almost impossible.
Yeah, there might have been some alcohol involved, but nonetheless, I roam the streets of Vegas freely. But they literally have been with me, and literally I can't keep a track of anything I lose. It feels like a cell phone a quarter, but these two dice, I'm like Rain Man when it comes to them. And so I've guarded them with my life for years, and on the rare occasion where I think that I may be about to do something incredibly silly, like take all my clothes off and jump in a pool, I generally hand them to one of my close friends or team members to hold them for safekeeping.
Excellent. So the casino, you didn't get caught. I got to bring up Alabama because everybody knows about it anyway, right?
Yeah.
What? Take us through the steps here. What happened? Why? How? And what'd you learn?
Sure. I mean, listen, it was arrogant to possess cannabis in a state like Alabama. More importantly, to be dressed the way I was, which was not exactly assimilating to the local community. I'm not a conspirator.
What was the outfit? What was the outfit? Let me make sure.
White Bermuda shorts, $1,000 red suede Gucci loafers. A fedora and a Robert Graham shirt. I mean, if that doesn't scream idiot possessing cannabis, I don't know what does. But what I did was fundamental.
They arrested you for the outfit trip.
The fashion police jumped me for sure.
Yeah.
So that I would have been convicted in the public court of public opinion, I should say. But in all seriousness, I mean, listen, the possession of marijuana, which ultimately I was charged with possession of marijuana second degree, was wrong. Fortunately for me, it was a misdemeanor. Again, 2+ tenths of a gram. It was very unclear as to what I had. The state of Alabama doesn't have the familiarity with a multitude of infused products that we have. And I learned my lesson. I did my time. I repaid the community of Fairhope, Alabama, if it will, or Baldwin County, I should say. I spent 7 months under supervision of the courts for urine analysis, no alcohol or drugs of any sort, and ultimately, the case was dismissed. I can't remember the technical terms. I immediately reported it to the MED, of which there was no issue, and I didn't reach out to the Denver Post, but I realized quickly that the gig was up. There was lots of allegations swirling around this story, but fundamentally, Seth, and although a little bit of his tongue-in-cheek, I think I can maybe attribute John Ingold, who's a very, very popular and prolific writer here for the Denver Post. I mean, I've said tongue-in-cheek that probably the real headline should have been Colorado marijuana moron, again, because I clearly knew better, but was wrong, maybe arrogant. But, it said Colorado marijuana mogul, so I guess I took that away from it.
Right.
I'm not sure how proud my mother was, but, I took this opportunity to address my community, my contemporaries, that, we have to remember what we do is still illegal at the federal level, and there are many communities, and at that time certainly more than 3/4 of the state of our United States did not offer some form of access to cannabis. Those tides have changed, and I think we're quickly achieving the tipping point. Representative Blumenauer out of Oregon suggested that over 213 million Americans now reside in states that offer some access. I think that's well past the tipping point, since I think we have about 350 million citizens. So we're trending the right direction. But I think that was a lesson not only learned by me, but certainly acknowledged by many others. I think also sort of anecdotally, I think many people thought I was probably an undercover police officer or narc, and maybe this was the pivotal point, or the point of inflection in my cannabis, or my career as a cannabis executive, that that I was outed for just being another guy. I will not mention his name, but certainly an icon within the industry that has had his own setbacks legally. Picked up the phone, immediately demonstrated his support, and then said, Tripp, we all thought you were a sissy because we didn't think that you used marijuana. Sissy was not the chosen term that he used. But,
Sure.
At the end of the day, I appreciated that support. My brothers and sisters have also experienced similar setbacks. Generally, I've been certainly early on to support them once I understand the issues. And ultimately, I think there'll be a day where nobody, certainly men of color who are disproportionately arrested, generally blacks and whites, Hispanics use cannabis in the same percentage, but a disproportionate men of color are languishing in local, state, and federal prisons. This needs to end because families are destroyed, lives are crushed, futures are devastated because of this plant that at worst has wellness qualities, but at best is potentially saving people's lives. I'm not making that statement. I'm not an MD or a doctor, but I think I could certainly argue towards that.
Totally, and we've got Nurse Heather coming up soon, so we'll get to medical, and we'll get to cannabis as medicine, certainly. But I feel like you took Alabama, and you could have gone two ways with it. You could have kind of retreated as far as public persona, or carried it forward. And you've said, I think, to me, that this shouldn't be a nameless, faceless industry. And was that the moment that you realized that, or what? What are your thoughts there?
I think I think part of what I would describe as persecution may have had something to do with the fact that I was already fairly public. I'm not sure if I had already done the 60 Minutes. I believe that I had, but I think for me that real decision was when I was offered the opportunity to do CNBC Squawk on the Street with Mark Haynes and Aaron Burnett. Mark Haynes, God rest his soul, is no longer on this planet. Died shortly after my interview. But, I had to make a very calculated decision, a decision that I needed the support of my family, I needed the support of my partner, I needed the support of my team members, because we were going to make it very clear who I was, what I do, and where I do it. And with that, obviously, comes the inherent risk. And taking it back to my father, who religiously lays on the couch in his comfy home on the beach in Florida. And I called him the night before and said, Dad, because to be blunt, I don't think he was really aware what I was doing. I've always been pretty private in my business matters. I'll tell you everything you don't want to know about me personally. But I said, Dad, tomorrow when you're watching Squawk on the Street, you're going to recognize somebody, and you'll probably react. Do not call me. I will call you. And I don't think I was off the set, potentially still in the seat with my ear mic on, and he was blowing my phone up. And to be honest with you, Seth, I was nervous. My father, had he ever discovered that I, or worse, my brother, since my brother has been using marijuana since he was about 15, I never
Right.
did. I mean, I was really nervous of what his reaction would be, but God bless him. He's from that day been one of my biggest fans, the most supportive. And just this morning was blowing up my phone, unfortunately, at about 6:30 a.m. because he had something to share about the industry that he had read earlier that day. I reminded him that I was 2 hours behind him. But he's got a real passion, and with that comes a real support. And I'm truly fortunate to have the support of my father, my family, certainly my business partner, who, even in times of difficulty like the arrest, was there to stand behind me. And again, it's important to note that I think I've really unfairly been given a lot of that credit. I'm honored. I met with the editor-in-chief of Reason magazine, which I had the privilege of really representing the industry. I think the title of the cover story was "Pot Goes Legit," the one and only time I've ever been photographed with marijuana. And he shared with me a story. He says, "I thought you were completely insane to be doing this, so much that I called my publisher and we talked to the attorneys and said, do we have inherent risk if this guy gets jacked by the federal government?" But at the end of the day, it's really a privilege to represent in part the industry and to have so many strong team members alongside me, not even behind me, that are leading this charge.
Yeah, no, and I'll you say a lot when you speak, and each time you complete a thought, Tripp, it does go back to that Jesuit upbringing. You keep talking about others. When you finish your thought, it's very interesting. You really do have that people for others mentality, and it's in you. I don't think you even know that you're doing it.
No, clearly, but get out of my head, would you? It's uncomfortable you being in there. God knows what else. God knows what else you discover.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll go a little lighter. We talked about Red Dice Holdings. What's in the name there? What about Dixie Elixirs? How did you discover that name?
Well, we've always had a strong affinity to the South, as you well know. My business, my partner and I's business, is based in the South. We had some former team members that were also from the South, and Dixie is paying homage to the South. For full disclosure, I was born in the District of Columbia, which technically is below the Mason-Dixon line, so I think that makes me a Southerner. Ultimately we thought it was a name that had some legs. I hope one day it's an iconic brand. I certainly think that it has a lot of legs, certainly notoriety, brand awareness, brand loyalty. I remember the San Francisco Chronicle called us the Pepsi of the marijuana industry. Again, tying it back to those brands, I mean, if you think December 5th, 1933, which we both know was the end of prohibition of alcohol, brands were on the cusp of greatness. Think Anheuser-Busch, which delivered a case of Budweiser to the White House via Clydesdale horse-drawn carriage. And so, we're, probably a little past December 5th, right? We've got 15, 16 months under our belt, but we're still early in the game. And so I'm incredibly excited for what the next couple of dozen innings will have to offer us and my team members.
Do you think it's still the top of the first? That you've made that analogy before. Where do you think we are in the baseball game of cannabis?
Well, I think we're in, it's the World Series, right? And I think we're, early stages of the series. I mean, whether it's, the second or third inning, it's cliched. It doesn't really matter. But, most importantly, people ask me, is it too late? And I just scratch my head. Maybe if I was a selfish human being, I'd say, yes, it's way too late. Go find the next big thing. But, any individual who has any semblance of intelligence will understand that that's just not the case. I mean, there are hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to be made in this industry. But more importantly, there are millions of individuals that are still intended to embrace this plant. And we've got a lot of hard work ahead of us. And so, again, reminding you back that there's not going to be one brand or one individual, the oligarch of the cannabis industry. It's going to be again, hundreds of people, but more importantly, millions of people, hopefully many veterans that will ultimately be able to be advised by their VA doctor, which unfortunately was shot down last week. And, that's success, in my opinion, as much as earning a dollar, because, when American soldiers or individuals take their lives, because alcohol or tobacco or opiates just didn't get it done, that's a big loss, and we shouldn't take that for granted. So, I truly believe that we will all, everybody, you, me, and the guy that's going to join the industry next week, will play a real meaningful role in that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just to stay on PTSD for a minute, that we had some of the veterans at Cann Awards, which was great. And you've talked about your support for Sue Sisley's research. Do you want to just get into that for a moment so folks can check that out?
Yeah, well, Sue Sisley is truly a warrior. And just a badass, powerful thinker. I hope I can use ass on your show. I just was honored and privileged to host her here last week, 2 weeks ago. I had the pleasure of spending some time with Rick Doblins, who's the ED for MAPS, which has been kind enough to take Sue under her belt. I mean, this is a woman that has given up her entire, I dare say, life, but certainly her career as a very accomplished physician working under the guidance of the University of Arizona, Phoenix. And, she lost her job for what she was doing, could have risked losing everything, the industry. And certainly my partner and I, now much more publicly, but previously very privately, have supported her for years. And, whether it's 22 Americans, which is the number that we talk about, or the reality, which is probably closer to 50 Americans, soldiers, men and women that fought overseas, who are suffering from this quote-unquote non-treatable illness, are taking their lives every single day. 22 today, 44, 66, 88. I, as a businessman, make a bad decision, it costs me money. I can make that up. Since we applied for these federal research permits, or the federal approval for clinical research for the treatment of PTSD for veterans, literally over 30,000+ men and women are no longer on this planet. That loss will not be recouped. And although I don't consider myself a marijuana activist, and that may make me unpopular amongst some of my peers, contemporaries, I think at best maybe I'm a reformist, primarily because of the business opportunity that comes along with it. But this is something that I'm damn passionate about. And, my partner and I have raised tens of thousands of dollars on an annual basis to make sure that this woman and her co-workers have what she needs. But I only have so much influence. And so anybody that is listening needs to understand how important it is to get NIDA, the National Institute for Drug Abuse, to free up this cannabis, as well as the DEA to get out of the way. And although we're close, I can tell you it will not be tomorrow, which means no less than 22, but potentially as many as 50 American heroes will not be on this planet.
Yeah, no, that puts it in very real terms, and we touched on it earlier, but we are focused on cannabis as medicine here, as well as cannabis as business. So we're gonna have certainly folks talking to that, because it comes up in every conversation that I have, no matter who it is. A CEO of a business or a nurse, it doesn't matter. Cannabis is medicine. So I know that you're not making any claims, but there is absolutely that application. So we support that too. I guess it's time for final questions. So I have two final questions. They both sound the same, though. So the first question is, what has surprised you most in cannabis? And then the second question is kind of the same, but a little bit broader. What has surprised you most in life? So, first question first, what has surprised you most in this crazy industry?
Just the incredibly powerful thinkers. I think even today, 5 years later, with the thousands, if not tens of thousands, of positive stories associated with both the legalization of adult use marijuana, but more prevalent, the implementation of medical marijuana programs, both domestically and now internationally, that there's the stereotype, which I reject, that this is a stoner's industry. That term is offensive, as is ganjapreneur, by the way, equally as offensive to me, but I never cease to be amazed when I go to an event in Washington, D.C., and just see people who are so thoughtful and such powerful thinkers, men and women, and more recently, seemingly more women, which is very, very exciting, highly supportive of more women entering into the space. And that's really refreshing. And what that takes is people coming out of the shadows, to attribute this quote to Steve D'Angelo, the executive director of Harborside Health, out of the shadows and into the light, and how important and how appropriate that statement is. This is something that needs to take place more often, because technology is going to be one of the single greatest influencers for our industry over the next probably 2+ years, and is really going to create significant velocity. So that is just something that I come back from a week-long trip to DC, and I am smiles ear to ear, because I'm truly impressed with the current set of cannabis entrepreneurs, but also the next generation of business owners. And I think that's going to pay massive dividends, truly be accretive to our society, both here in the United States and in communities around the globe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We are certainly headed in the right direction. All right, so that's industry. Now life. And how often do you think about this? What's most surprised you, personally over life?
I'll tell you, and maybe some people will scoff at this, but humility is an incredibly important quality to have. And maybe I'm accused of not being humble or maintaining, because I'm willing to sit down and talk to you for an hour about some things that are incredibly personal, but also some things that are incredibly important to our industry. But when I look back at who I was in 2001, and specifically on September 10th of 2001, I realized how truly the opportunities that exist if you can evolve as a human being. And I appreciated your kind and generous compliments about maybe laying off some of the credit. But on that chosen day, our world changed, certainly our country, and I lost 9 guys, individuals that are no longer on this planet. I had a real decision to make as to what that meant to me. And what it meant to me was putting aside material possessions. Listen, I live a wonderful lifestyle. I've got a fabulous family. I've got a beautiful daughter who has pretty much anything she wants within reason. But at the end of the day, it is not the money that motivates me, nor do I believe it motivates my partner. And candidly, most of my coworkers, my team members, my partners, we are motivated because, number one, fundamentally, we believe we're part of history. We're making it, not reading it, alongside tens of thousands of other people. We are helping people, in a bunch of different categories, which I need not remind you of, but certainly veterans, since it was top of mind. We are creating jobs that didn't exist other than held by cartels that murdered 70,000+ people just to the south of us. These are not tax-paying citizens. And at the end of the day, we're creating wealth for our communities in a bunch of different categories. But, the easiest one to talk about is the building of public schools here in the state of Colorado. And so that humility that I adopted, literally on that chosen day, really has catapulted me as a human being, and putting aside the cannabis industry, putting aside Dixie just for a moment, because the reality is, Seth, our friendship, whether it be personal or professional, will probably pay greater dividends than any deal that we could do or any strategic partnership or any advertising dollars. And literally, when I wake up every morning, I can't wait to interact with somebody, whether it's somebody like you or my assistant. And I'm blessed because that's not necessarily how I approached the world back on September 10th of 2001.
There you go. Lessons learned abound. So, Tripp, thanks, so much for your time here. I feel like we've got so much more to cover, and I mean, we should absolutely do this again. Whenever there's a little bit of news or whenever you have another couple minutes for us. How about that?
Well, hey, man, it's great to work alongside you guys. We appreciate the generous coverage, but again, more so what you're doing for the industry. If and when you think it's appropriate to bring me back on, again, just the level of professionalism you bring to our space is really refreshing. So thanks again for the opportunity to join you today.
You got it. We'll see you down the line.
All right, thank you.
And there it was, Tripp Keber. And hopefully you see what I see, which is that is a good guy. He does care about a lot of things. He's got a lot to say about a lot of things. And some people get confused by that. But talk about his dad, talk about his daughter, and everything in between. I had a good time. Hope you did too. If you did, let us know. See you down the line.